Hey everyone, thanks for joining this episode of the Union Podcast. I'm Scott King and I am joined by Chris Kraus. Hi, Chris.
How's it going?
It's going well. Today we are going to start a series called The Art of the Possible. So people ask us about automation. They ask us about AI. What can it do? What can it, how can I use it? What are the outcomes? So they basically asking, like, what's possible? Like, give me a list of items that I can choose from, like a menu or something, or a template. Everyone always wants a template. So we're going to provide you some. And today we're talking about HR use cases. So human resources processes, how can they be enhanced with automation? How can AI help alleviate some of these concerns? So we've got some use cases that we want to talk through, some of the challenges, some of the things that you can do, some of the outcomes that you can expect, and how easy or hard each one of these use cases is to implement. So, Chris, any opening remarks before we get started with basically Q&A scenarios?
Yeah, so I think definitely this is stuff people are talking about, and everybody's got a little bit of fear of like these type of use cases. So the nice thing is HR can talk about them in the context of how it would help themselves and employees, so that it's assistive to help actually with that adoption. Because a chief people officer really is worried about training, culture, how do you adopt, how do you grow your employees? So this is actually a pretty cool way where HR can say, in our world, we could help and grow. And here's examples. We're not going to get rid of people. We're going to actually make things better. And then how do you start building the trust of AI is, not going to take your job. It's, it's not a robot. It's actually a very assistive technology. So it's kind of a good thing for HR to have these things to say, look, this is helping. We want to learn how to trust AI and use it as a virtual worker versus thinking it's going to like replace everybody like a robot. And so I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think AI is going to really need a shepherd or a mentor into a company. I think the HR organization is perfect for that. If you do have a big enough one, right, that someone can say, okay, just like you did learning and development for whatever you're teaching your employees, AI can be one of those. And I think the easiest use case to get started is just a simple Q&A for questions, right, Chris? So if you have questions about policies, procedures, whatever your role may be, you don't know everything. So how does AI and automation help with, finding information?
Well, there's actually a lot of devil in the details. Like I have a friend I go to the gym with, Marlene, and she's an HR manager in a restaurant. or in a hotel chain, and they have restaurants. So she said, really, it looks like I'm employing people in multiple countries, even though some of them are in California, some of them are in Texas, some are in New York. The employment laws are so different. So when she has to answer questions about employment, benefits, there's the core policies that the company has, but then they have to, is this a union inside of New York, or is this a CCPA company in California? So there's a lot of details there. So actually having something like an AI platform who can read all the policies and then help you compare and contrast and get answers on those is super helpful. Even if it's a small company, like she's an HR generalist, she's the sole person in HR, but she said it's actually a ton of work to keep track of that because, some are union states, some are non-union states. Privacy concerns in California is different than in Texas or Louisiana. So she said, literally, we're talking through this. She said, we have policies for hiring, policies for like how overtime works, how different things like that work. I'm a generalist. I have to know all those things. So we have things written down. We have like resources like SHRM. We have legal guidance, but I have to keep track of all those things. And there's a lot of details. So I think answering questions from employees about these things is helpful because you could literally ask, like, what is the difference between, overtime for contractors and a union versus non-union? And yes, there's details about that, but actually get those answers. So I was explaining the story, and she's like, this would really actually help me. It wouldn't get rid of me, but it would really help me because there's a lot of details in that I need bullet pointed and help me get answers for. So that's a use case, just like an individual, say in HR, and maybe you're in a larger company. Like Scott and I worked for CA, so we had HR journalists like Christina Hoffman in each business unit. I didn't know anything because I knew just to call her, and she's like, "Oh, if you want to hire someone, you want to do this, you want to do that."
Christina
She
Hoffman,
was like,
how did you remember that?
"Oh, she was actually one of the nicest
That's
HR
years
people."
ago.
Oh yeah, that's 10 years ago, but she was she was great. She was literally so any question you had, she knew how the company policies worked, how you did things, and so it was so easy. It was like, I would say, ask Krista would be ask Christina. Like it would be the same thing, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So that kind of moves to that self-service. It's like, okay, how do employees know to do things, right? It's the similar concept. Like you still have FMLA leave, you have state regulations, you have local policies. Things change based on if you're a full-time employee, say a part-time employee or an hourly wager, things like that. So those people still have questions. So if you're in a medium-sized company and you don't have, say, an HR rep in every business unit like we did, or Christina, then you could actually make that self-service. So you could actually let people do things like look up what constitutes overtime for an hourly worker versus a contractor based on this company versus this other operating company, or versus unions and things like that. So you could actually extend those things there. The nice thing is with AI giving you the answers, you'll always get a very consistent answer. It'll tell you if it doesn't know the answer. So it's not going to make something up. But then you can actually say, keep track of those questions and know what are the top questions or concerns that people have, so you can maybe start proactively addressing them. So there's a lot of things you can actually move past just Q&A, not just the audience, but actually help, say, with training and facilitating that.
Yeah, that would be really helpful for companies that don't offer whatever system they're asking about. Like you may not even have access to that system, but you could have an AI assistant or AI agent ask on your behalf, right? So that would be that would alleviate a lot of the IT issues, right? You can't have everybody with access to say a system that has like a per user pricing model, and you got like 1,000 employees and like one person you can't pay 12 months to ask one question. So maybe something like that too would be beneficial.
Yeah, that ability to integrate to a system, say, okay, this is an employee in this state, in this country, or what have you. This is their profile, and answer the question specifically. Because let's face it, some things you don't do very often, like look up your PTO leave or request vacations. You're never going to remember how to get to that system and log in, right?
Yeah,
you just do it so infrequently.
I only ask for my W-2 once a year. Hey,
exactly.
I know you already emailed this to me, but I lost it. Where do I get it?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so that's kind of Q&A, and then from a generalist perspective, and then extending that to employee self-service, I think that's a no-brainer. It helps people build trust in AI. Clearly, no one's job is in danger for that. So let's walk through. The next one we have is candidate experience. So we really, we struggled with this one because there are so many different systems and SaaS products that enhance the candidate experience. But I think where we find, like our product, Krista, where we find the biggest benefit is not with the knowledge workers and not with the white collar workers like us, because there are lots of systems and lots of processes to do this. It's really slow. I always laugh that it takes forever to get a regular job, but the football coaches, they get hired in 6 hours. How is that possible?
Yep.
But for the majority of the U.S. that are blue collar workers or labor workers, right? The number one job in every state is either you work for Walmart or you're a truck driver. Right. These guys may or may not have resumes. How can AI or automation improve the candidate experience for the majority of the workforce?
Right. So it's really meeting the candidate where they are. So, someone who's a Java developer is going to go into a resume and software. They're going to go to Monster. They're going to go to LinkedIn and do things. But for everybody else, it's like there's not a lot of automation and platforms out there. So as an employer, you need to meet the people where they are. Make it easy. So everything should be able to be done, say, through an automated process on a mobile phone. Don't assume people have, computers and they're walking around with them and they have internet, but most people have a phone. So scoping it to like, how do you interact with them? And then you're going to basically build a mini resume. Like if you're looking to hire someone in, say, a restaurant or hire someone in a grocery store chain, you're not going to ask for 15 years of experience and, patents you've applied for and things like that. It's going to be more specific to where do you want to work? How many hours can you work? Can you work day shift? Do you need to work evening or early morning shift? What skills do you have? Have you done this other places? So really basically letting you gather information to fit them into a specific position without having to have a formal resume and all that review process. Because those people do get hired much faster because it's usually done in the field by a local manager. It's not going through the corporate, recruiting arm. So there's a lot of opportunities there to make that easier of meet them where they are, get the processes, but realize it's very distributed. Every grocery store is going to have a manager on duty who does that. It's not like it's a centralized HR function itself in that case. They're very distributed. So automation, actually doing rules on employment and age and all those things, making sure they meet them, full-time versus part-time, benefits or no benefits, actually automating that to make it very smooth so there's no questions that they can't answer makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Then I like how you said, meet them where they are, because they may only have WhatsApp or SMS, or they may not even have a smartphone, right, where they can't download an app. So I think that is that's a huge benefit. So if we're going to improve the candidate experience, we're going to have to track these people, right? So So the next use case that we want to walk through is really the recruiting and the tracking of all the applicants. And there are a ton of ATS systems that do this, right? But just like we talked about with white versus blue collar jobs, there are some gaps in these systems. Like some of the let's say mid-market companies where they have just a payroll system. The payroll system does some of this, but it doesn't really do enough. And then an ATS system is just too much, right? They don't need that much, or maybe they have disparate systems. And, this is the whole process orchestration thing that we'll get into later, is moving data from one system to another is a problem. But from a recruiting and tracking perspective, Chris, how, if we tie in the candidate experience with, the lower end of the labor market, how does this work? So theoretically, if I have an ATS system or payroll, and then if not.
Yeah. So a lot of times the first thing is actually scheduling interviews and then keeping track of the interviews they showed up, the yes or no decisions, things like that. So a lot of that is not automated. It's all, let me look at my calendar, let me put some of my calendar, very manual. So can we actually, help with a candidate being able to say from a simple web page on their phone, say, I want to do an interview on Tuesday and present them with this time slot's available. Can you come in? And then gather some information about and tell them what they need to bring when they come in. It's you need to bring in your driver's license. You need to bring in certain things. And there's going to be some of that just core scheduling that usually is not supported by any formal system itself to help people with that. And then it's setting up kind of the expectations. What do you need to bring? What documentation do you need for employment process? Do you have a birth certificate, social security card, all those type of things that they may need to actually complete the process? Because sometimes these are one and dones, to bring them on board, you need to make sure they're of age and they've got all those type of things in place. But a lot of times there is another step behind that. It's okay, do we have to do some type of background check? Or do we have to do a driver's license validation because they're going to be driving for us? Do we have to verify they don't have a bunch of speeding tickets and that? So, like you mentioned, this kind of starts the concept of orchestration, of automation, of getting them to a point where they can be hired. And sometimes there's third-party checks. I mean, I know we were doing some stuff with nurses, and there's a system you can ask, give me all their nursing credentials, but it was all manual. So you submitted the request, a day or two later, you got a response back, and then you had to manually match those up. So putting some automation to keep track of those things so they don't slip through is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. All the credential checking, and I mean, driver's license, welders, or union cards, right? Like Texas is not a union state, but I guess you'd have to do that. So, okay. So if we improve and we attract the candidate, we track them, and now they're hired, employee onboarding is always a big conversation, because that is complicated, right? Because you got to sign them up for systems access, for facilities, for security, for, all the different payroll and things. And if they need equipment and training, like clearly this is probably, to me, this is the ripest opportunity for automation, because like most people could articulate the cascading effects of getting hired because they've been hired a few times. How does automation help with this? Because it seems really complicated, and it seems like this is the ripest opportunity.
Yeah, there's so much tribal knowledge in this. Like I said before, we would have ask Christina, and she had the checklist. She knew how you did it for this company, for this business unit, based on your location, right? And so when we were hired people onshore and offshore, she had different checklists. And so there's a lot of workflow and tracking in that process. And like you mentioned, the interesting thing about this is HR they've got one little tiny step, right? They may be giving you an offer letter. They may be getting that in place, but then the benefits department, then the payroll department, then facilities has to badge you. Security has to assign you buildings you can get to. Then you have to have desks and hardware, and then system access. So this is really orchestrating lots of areas across the company. I mean, you touch almost every part of the company when you bring someone on board, if you step back and think about it, because everybody has to know that you're going to be there. You have to have systems access. You have to have your hardware. So that's a lot of orchestration. And I mean, I know people said, I'm starting work, but I know I'm not going to do anything for 2 weeks because I don't know if I'll have a computer my first day. I remember there was a big deal. It's like, you have an email address your first day. You don't have a computer yet, but we have an email address for you, right? So IT could get that provision quickly, but then that cascaded into all the other systems, like getting hardware, systems access, and those things. So there's so much tribal knowledge, and it's a lot of manual tasks and checking, right? Lots of emails get sent. Huge orchestration opportunity there.
Yeah. Well, your inbox will be full, but you better have the swag bag at my desk, right? With my hoodie and my coffee cup. And
these days for sure.
My mouse pad. All right. So the reverse of that, employee offboarding, right? So, I'm surprised when people leave companies that they still have systems access to a lot of places because people just forget about it. I think that is the ripest opportunity for me, because data leakage and cybersecurity is always I'm fearful of my information going anywhere. And then I'm fearful of a rogue employee, siphoning off data. So employee offboarding seems ripe too. How would that work? Can't you just run the whole process in reverse?
You would reverse the process because in the perfect world, you'd have single sign-on. But let's face it, so many systems aren't. So you have to reverse back. What systems did they have access to? Start revoking those accesses. And then, turning off corporate email is one thing, and then actually getting their badges deactivated, right? But you still have to give them a little bit of access to submit expense reports and things like that. There's always some follow-up paperwork. So you just can't blanket turn everything off. You may have a couple systems they need access to. And this is very common. People say old logins are just left available on systems, so there's system breaches there. People hacked passwords for former employees that were still active in systems. Seems it's ripe for that whole security problem there. But it's literally unwind everything that you did and keep track of that.
Yeah, that would be pretty scary because any kind of password resets, like nobody's going to read that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so onboarding, I love that one. I think the onboarding, offboarding are my favorite. Outside of like just general process orchestration. So, I mean, we've been talking about HR processes, but this could be any process in any company, right? There are a series of steps, right? There are a lot of systems that we mentioned, and there are point systems that do this. There are point AI tools that do this, but nothing works together, right? You can't, even if you bought point AI systems or point automation systems, you still have to, like you talked about tribal knowledge earlier, there's still going to be that tribal knowledge that says, oh, you have to do this and then this and then this. That is not scalable. So how can, process orchestration, like with Krista, alleviate some of those concerns and make things just go faster?
Yeah, so that's definitely when you have people who know specifics of how to hire someone into a union or non-union state, or the privacy concerns of data with CCPA or not, or GDPR, whatever it is. So when you actually put those steps inside of, say, software automation like Krista, everybody follows the same process. So everything's being done. And then if something changes, it's not a training problem. It's a change the automation to include a step because something changed at a federal level, or change a step because something changed at a state level. And it's implemented automatically. People don't have to be like, okay, do I need to retrain because a process changed? So it really does help with general liability of doing the process the correct way every time. And everything, thinking about, we call it dotting the I's, crossing the T's. It's literally that level of all that minutia of details. Process orchestration, even if it's orchestrating people and saying, I put a ticket into ServiceNow and then verify, did security create a badge? Yes. And then create a ticket in Jira for a global ID and then check it. So sometimes it's literally, I've put information in your system and then verify that you manually did something, or sometimes it's we actually can automate those steps. But it's a huge, huge problem. And it's not specific to HR. It's specific to like running a business, right? Everybody has these problems. Whether sometimes it's how do you open the office in the morning? It's like, obviously turn on the lights, but then it's like, did you set the phones right? Did you do these things? Did you, all those type of things you have to do to like open the office in the morning? Those are processes that everybody has to do, and they need to be done consistently the same way. And you do get an audit trail when you automate things. So if someone needs to know, when did this happen? When did we do these things? The good things with automation, we do have that audit trail, so we can walk back and improve processes over time. Say what's taking too long, what can we do better with? So there's efficiencies that can be helped in understanding the process along with prevention of errors.
Yeah, I mean, and then what you didn't really talk about like improving the process. If you get enough transactions going back and forth with these processes, you can have a machine learning opportunity, a model to actually understand like, hey, you could improve this, or this is always the exception. This ought to be the rule anyways. So that's another opportunity. So I know, Chris, that we talked about all these processes, just, HR. Obviously, you can do this with others, but we just wanted to provide an overview for human resource processes because people ask us about that. What, from a closing standpoint, if I'm an HR person, how do I get started? Like, what are some of the easiest use cases, and what can I do to bring like automation and AI and to alleviate everybody's fears?
Yeah, so I think in HR, you have to be in the forefront of like, this is new technology. So getting people comfortable with the technology to understand it, so that you have just making adoption easier. So to realize it's not going to take away your jobs. It's not going to do all those crazy things. There's always fear, uncertainty, and doubt with that. But the idea is starting small. Say something like Q&A. It's very auditable. People can see the answers, and starting internally. So let's say executives and say HR people start using it, see how it's doing things accurately, so they build trust. and then you bring it to your larger audience of your employees. Now, then maybe you expand that to your customer support calls, your customer center, who have customer calls and they have questions about returns and policies. But starting somewhere you have to start somewhere to build the trust and understand how it's going to help you. Then it's very easy to say, let's expand horizontally within another part of the organization doing the same thing, or going vertical and doing more orchestration capabilities. So it's neat because HR is in the job. Part of their job title is like culture and helping people understand and being happy employees and making their work-life balance better. This will actually help with that, right? So it seems like a logical place to start, or at least evangelize out to the rest of the organization.
Seems logical to me. Well, appreciate it, Chris. I love this conversation. If anybody has a question, you can obviously reach out to us on probably LinkedIn is easiest because we live there. Or you can go to Krista.ai, poke around, let us know who you are, and we'd be happy to help you. So until next time.